The wooden chair felt cold beneath my body as I sat, hands folded neatly in my lap, playing the part of the good, submissive wife. Elias was seated opposite me at his lawyer's table, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his smile wide and confident. He looked like he'd already won. Maybe he thought he had. "You'll never touch another cent of my money. Not for the rest of your life," he whispered, just loud enough for his lawyer to hear. His voice carried that same tone he used when he told me I couldn't go grocery shopping without asking him first, or when he explained why I no longer needed my own credit card. He looked proud, like a hunter who'd just claimed the biggest prize of his life. Kendra was perched in the gallery behind him, her perfectly manicured fingers resting on her designer handbag. She leaned slightly forward, her red lips curving into a smile that turned my stomach. "That's right, babe," she mouthed softly, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She called him babe, the same way I used to when I thought our marriage meant something, when I thought the man I married actually existed. Dorotha, Elias's mother, sat right next to Kendra, as if they were old friends planning a high-society luncheon. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her cold blue eyes drilled into me as if I were something dirty she had just stepped in. She had never liked me. Not since the day Elias brought me home 8 years ago. I wasn't good enough for her precious son. I wasn't rich enough. Didn't have enough class. Wasn't worthy of the Caldwell name, she'd always say. "She doesn't deserve one dime," Dorothea declared, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. She smiled as she said it. The same smile she gave me every Christmas when she handed me a gift card to a department store while gifting Kendra extravagant jewelry. Even before the affair, Dorothea had already been plotting my replacement. My lawyer, Mr. Rohr, sat beside me, shuffling papers. He looked nervous, like he knew we were about to lose everything. Elias's legal team consisted of 3 attorneys from the most expensive firm on Fifth Avenue. They carried briefcases stuffed with documents proving I had never held a job, had no qualifications, and deserved nothing more than a basic allowance. They painted me as a gold digger who had trapped their poor innocent client. Judge Wallace, a woman in her late 50s, with a piercing gaze and salt and pepper hair, had been listening to their arguments all morning. She had a reputation for being tough but fair. She didn't smile much and didn't seem impressed by expensive suits or renowned lawyers, but even she appeared poised to rule in Elias's favor. "Your Honor," Elias's lead counsel said, rising with a thick binder in his hands. "My client has been more than generous. Mrs. Caldwell has no work history, no education beyond a high school diploma, and no assets of her own. She has lived a comfortable life for 8 years without contributing anything to the household. Income, a modest monthly stipend, is more than equitable." I wanted to laugh. No. Work history. I had managed Elias's entire social calendar, organized his business dinners, and handled all the household administration that kept his life running smoothly. No education. I had a bachelor's degree in marketing that I never got to use because Elias convinced me I didn't need to work. No. Assets. That was because every time I tried to save money or open my own account, Elias found a reason why I couldn't. But I sat silently, playing the role everyone expected. The weak, helpless wife who didn't understand money, business, or how the real world worked. I had been playing that part for so long I almost believed it myself sometimes. Elias turned to look at me, his dark eyes brimming with satisfaction. He thought he had completely crushed me. For the past 6 months since I discovered his cheating, he had been preparing for this moment. He had moved money, concealed assets, and made sure everything appeared to belong only to him. He thought I was too stupid to notice, too scared to fight back. Mr. Rohr slowly stood up, looking like he was walking to his own execution. "Your Honor, I have one final piece of evidence to submit on behalf of my client." His voice shook slightly as he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single white envelope. Mrs. Caldwell has prepared a letter for this court's consideration. Elias's lawyer looked confused. They hadn't been informed of any letter. Elias frowned, his confident smile fading a little. Kendra shifted in her seat, her perfect posture becoming slightly less perfect. Dorothea's cold eyes narrowed as she watched Mr. Rohr walk toward the judge's bench. Judge Wallace took the envelope and carefully opened it. The courtroom was so silent I could hear the rustle of the paper as she unfolded the letter. Her eyes moved across the page, reading in silence. At first her expression didn't change. Then slowly her eyebrows began to rise. She read for what felt like an eternity. Elias's lawyers began whispering among themselves. Elias himself stared at me, trying to guess what on earth I could have written that held any significance. He still looked sure of himself, but now there was something else in his eyes, something that might have been worry.
Judge.
Wallace finished reading and looked up at everyone gathered before her.
Then,
something astonishing happened. She began to laugh, not a polite chuckle, but a deep, genuine belly laugh that bounced off the walls. She laughed so hard she had to put the letter down and remove her glasses to wipe her eyes. "Oh, this is good," she said quietly, but her voice carried clearly in the silent room. "This is very, very good." The confident smiles vanished from their faces as if someone had flipped a switch. Elias's face turned pale. Kendra's mouth fell slightly open. Dorothea's icy composure cracked, and for the first time in 8 years, she looked genuinely afraid. I felt a small smile tug at the corner of my mouth. Finally, after months of planning and preparation, it was time for them to know the truth. 3 years ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. Elias would come home from work with flowers, kiss me at the door, and tell me how lucky he was to have me. We lived in his family's beautiful estate on the Upper East Side with its white columns and perfectly manicured lawn. I felt like a princess in a fairy tale. "Serena, you don't have to worry about money," Elias told me one evening as we sat at the dining room table. He cut his filet mignon with precise movements, just the way his mother had taught him. "I make enough for both of us.
You should focus on
making our home a beautiful place." I had been working at a small marketing agency downtown, helping local businesses with their advertising. I loved my job, the creative challenges, and the sense of accomplishment when a campaign succeeded. But Elias had been hinting for months that I should quit. "But I enjoy working," I said, twirling pasta on my fork. "And the extra money helps us save for our future." Elias put down his knife and looked at me with those dark eyes that used to make my heart flutter. "Honey, we don't need your little paycheck. It barely covers your gas and work clothes. Wouldn't you rather spend your time making our home perfect? Maybe start planning to have children." The way he said little paycheck made my cheeks burn. I made decent money, enough to pay for groceries and bills. But when I looked around our expensive dining room with its crystal chandelier and imported furniture, I felt small. Maybe he was
right.
Maybe my contribution didn't really matter. "I guess I could take some time off," I said softly. Elias's smile was radiant. "That's my smart girl. You'll be so much happier at home." Within a month, I had quit my job. Elias took over all our finances, saying it would be easier if everything came out of one account. He gave me a credit card for household expenses and told me to let him know if I needed anything else. At first, it felt good to be cared for. I spent my days decorating our house, cooking elaborate meals, and organizing Elias's business dinners. But slowly, things began to change. The credit card had a low limit, and Elias questioned every purchase. When I bought new curtains for the living room, he asked why I hadn't consulted him first. When I spent $50 at the grocery store, he wanted to see every receipt. "Serena, we need to be more careful with money," he said one night, going over the card statement with a red pen. "This charge from the coffee shop. What was that for?" "I met my friend Chloe for coffee," I said, feeling like a scolded child.
"It
was only $8. $8 here, $12 there." It adds up. Maybe you should invite your friends. Here. It's more cost-effective. I stopped meeting friends for coffee. Then I stopped buying new clothes without asking first. Then I stopped buying anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. Elias praised me for being so responsible, so understanding of our budget, but I noticed he was still buying expensive suits and going out to business lunches that cost more than my entire weekly allowance. Dorothea made everything worse. Elias's mother came over for dinner every Sunday and always had something to say about how I managed the house. The flowers in the garden weren't arranged correctly. The pot roast wasn't seasoned properly. My dress was too casual for a Caldwell family meal. Elias, darling, she said one Sunday, cutting her roast into tiny pieces. I saw a charming girl at the country club yesterday, Kendra Sterling, the interior designer. She's from such a good family, and her work is absolutely exquisite. Elias nodded politely, but I caught something in his expression. Interest. I may have heard of her work. Very talented. You should hire her to redecorate the guest rooms, Dorothea continued, not looking at me. They could use a professional touch. I had spent weeks decorating those guest rooms, choosing colors and fabrics I thought were lovely, but sitting there listening to Dorothea, I felt everything I did was wrong. Amateur, not good enough for their family standards. That's a marvelous idea, Mother. Elias said. Serena, what do you think? What could I
Say?
That I wanted to keep the rooms. I had worked so hard on that hiring someone else was like admitting I was a failure. Of course, I said with a smile that felt like plastic. Whatever you think is
Best.
That's when the phone calls started. Elias would step outside to take calls, saying they were about work. He started working late more often, coming home after I had already eaten dinner alone. When I asked about his day, his answers grew shorter, less detailed. How did the Corbu's project meeting go? I asked one night, as he loosened his tie.
Fine, he said, not
looking at me. The usual client demands, but I had seen his planner that morning when he left it on the kitchen
counter.
There was no Corbu's meeting scheduled. There was an entry that read KS10 Quack with the name of a restaurant I didn't recognize. I started paying attention to things I had ignored before. Credit card statements, Elias. Quickly tucked away. Phone calls that cut off when I entered the room. A new cologne that smelled different from his usual scent. Shirts that came back from the dry cleaners with lipstick smudges that weren't my shade. One night, while putting away his clean laundry, I found a receipt in his pants pocket. It was from an expensive downtown restaurant dated the previous Tuesday. The bill was for 2 people, including champagne and dessert. But Tuesday night, Elias had told me he was working late on paperwork at the office. My hands trembled as I held the receipt. The total was more than my monthly allowance. Someone had ordered the lobster and the chocolate sole. Dishes Elias always said were too expensive when we looked at menus together.
He said.
On our bed, staring at that slip of paper, and felt something break inside my chest. This wasn't about money or work stress or family pressure. This was about the lies. This was about Elias, living a completely different life when he wasn't with me. That night when Elias came home smelling of perfume that wasn't mine, I didn't say anything.
I
smiled and asked about his day, and he told me about meetings I now knew hadn't happened. I nodded, served him dinner, and pretended everything was normal. But inside, I was already starting to plan. The next morning, I waited for Elias to leave for work before getting dressed. Instead of my usual routine of cleaning and organizing, I put on dark jeans and a baseball cap. I felt like a spy in a movie, except this was my real life. Falling apart. I drove to Elias's office building on 5th Avenue and parked across the street where I could watch the entrance. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. What was I doing? Following my own husband like a crazy person. But I had to know the truth. At 11:30, Elias walked out of the building. He wasn't alone. A woman with long blonde hair and a red coat walked beside him. She was beautiful in a way that made my stomach hurt, tall, sleek, with perfect posture. And expensive clothes. Everything I wasn't. They got into Elias's car together, laughing about something. The woman put her hand on his arm as they talked, and Elias smiled at her the way he used to smile at me. I followed him through the city streets, keeping far enough away so they wouldn't see me. They went to the Caldwell Refuge, the elegant restaurant where Elias had taken me for our anniversary 2 years ago. The same restaurant where he told me we couldn't afford to eat anymore because we needed to save. I watched through the window as they sat at a corner table, holding hands over the white tablecloth. The woman had to be Kendra Sterling, the interior designer Doratha had mentioned. She was even more beautiful up close with perfect makeup and jewelry that probably cost more than my car.
She
Touched Elias's face gently, and he took her hand and kissed her palm. I felt like someone was squeezing my chest with both hands. I stayed in my car for 2 hours, watching them eat and laugh and act like a couple in love. When they finally left, Elias walked her to a silver BMW parked nearby. He kissed her.
Goodbye.
Not a quick peck, but a real kiss that lasted long enough for me to have to look away. That afternoon, Elias came home at his usual time with a story about a difficult client meeting. He complained about how boring his day had been, how he wished he'd spent it with me. I nodded, smiled, and served him the dinner I had somehow managed to cook while my world was collapsing. "How was your day, honey?" he asked, cutting his chicken as if nothing had happened.
Quiet, I said.
I rearranged the closets and did some reading. "That's my good girl," he said, reaching out to give me a pat. Always keeping busy.
I
Wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my plate against the wall and demand to know who Kendra was and how long this had been going on, but instead I squeezed his hand and asked if he wanted dessert. Over the next few weeks, I became an expert at following them. I learned their routine. Lunches on Tuesdays and Thursdays afternoon. Meetings that were actually dinners on Fridays. Weekend trips, Elias told me, were business conferences. They went to art galleries, wine tastings, and expensive boutiques where Kendra tried on clothes that cost more than I spent. In 3 months, Elias bought her jewelry, flowers, and designer handbags. He paid for everything with credit cards I had never seen. The worst part was seeing how happy he looked with her. He laughed more in one afternoon with Kendra than he had with me in the last year. He opened doors for her, pulled out her chair, and looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world. All the things he used to do for me when our marriage was real. One Saturday, I followed him to the Equestrian Center in upstate New York, where Dorotha was a member. I parked outside and watched through the fence as he and Kendra played tennis together. Dorotha was there, too, sitting at a table on the patio, applauding when Kendra made a good shot. After the game, the three of them sat together having drinks. Dorothea was animated in a way I had never seen her, laughing and gesturing as she talked with Kendra. She touched Kendra's arm affectionately and nodded approvingly at everything she said. It was clear that Dorotha didn't just know about the affair, she was encouraging it. I drove home and sat in my empty house, finally understanding the truth. This wasn't just about Elias having an affair. It was about replacing me completely. Dorotha had found someone she considered worthy of her son, and they were all working together to push me out. That night, Elias came home with scratches on his arms from the tennis game. When I asked about them, he said he'd been moving boxes at work and snagged his arm on a nail. Another lie told with such ease that I wondered how many others I had believed over the years. "Elias," I said carefully, "your mother mentioned that interior designer again at dinner last week, Kendra Sterling. Have you thought about hiring her?" His face didn't change, but I noticed a tiny pause before he answered. "Oh yeah, I looked into her, but she's very expensive. Maybe next year when business is better." "She must be very talented to charge that much." "I suppose so. I haven't actually met her personally." Lie after lie after lie.
I
nodded, smiled, and pretended to believe him. But inside I was taking notes. Every fabricated story, every invented excuse, every time he looked me in the eye and lied about where he had been and
Who he was with.
2 months into my investigation, I realized something that changed everything. Elias wasn't just having an affair. He was planning to leave me for Kendra, but he wanted to make sure I got nothing in the divorce. All those conversations about money, all the restrictions on my spending, all the ways he had made me financially dependent, it was all part of a plan. He was going to divorce me and claim I had contributed nothing to our marriage. He would keep the house, the cars, the investments, everything. I would be left with nothing while he started his new life with Kendra and his mother's approval. But Elias had made one crucial mistake. He thought I was too weak and too stupid to fight back. He had no idea I was watching, learning, and plotting my own strategy. As I sat in our bedroom that night, listening to him sleep soundly beside me, I made a decision. If Elias wanted to play a game of money and lies, I would learn to play it better than he did. The next morning, I waited for Elias to leave for his client meeting, which I knew was actually lunch with Kendra. Then, I did something I had never done before. I walked into his home office and started going through his papers. Elias's study was his private space, the one room in the house I was never supposed to clean or organize. He kept it locked when he wasn't home, but I had seen him hide the key under his desk lamp months ago. My hands were shaking as I turned the key and stepped inside. The office was neat and organized with filing cabinets along one wall and a large desk covered in papers. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I had to start somewhere. I began with the desk drawers, carefully going through folders and documents. Most of it was boring. Business stuff I didn't understand. Contracts for construction projects, letters from clients, invoices for materials. But in the bottom drawer, I found something interesting. A folder labeled personal accounts that contained bank statements I had never seen. Elias had 3 different bank accounts I knew nothing about. The statements showed huge amounts of money moving in and out, far more than I thought his business generated. There were deposits from companies I had never heard of and cash, withdrawals that seemed too large for normal expenses. I took pictures of everything with my phone, being careful to put every paper back exactly where I found it. My heart was pounding so fast I felt faint, but I kept going. If Elias was hiding money from me, I needed to know how much and where it was. In the filing cabinet, I found more surprises. There were documents for a corporation called Caldwell Holdings LLC, which Elias had never mentioned. According to the papers, this company owned several properties around the city, properties Elias had told me belonged to his clients. One folder contained receipts for expensive purchases I didn't recognize. A watch that cost $15,000. A vacation to the Maldives we never took. Jewelry from stores I had never been to. All of these things were paid for with money from accounts I didn't know existed. But the most shocking discovery was in a folder marked legal documents. Inside were papers from an attorney I had never heard of discussing something called asset protection strategies. The documents talked about moving money to offshore accounts and creating shell companies to hide wealth from potential creditors or legal claims. I didn't understand all the legal jargon, but I understood enough to know that Elias was purposefully hiding money. He was preparing for something, and I had the terrible feeling that something was our divorce. I spent 3 hours in that office, taking pictures of every document that looked important. By the time I heard Elias's car pull into the driveway, I had everything locked back up and was in the kitchen preparing lunch as if nothing had happened. "How was your meeting?" I asked as he kissed me on the cheek. "Productive," he said, loosening
His tie.
"The Valoria project is moving faster than expected." Another lie.
I
Had seen his planner and there was no Valoria project, but I smiled, nodded, and asked if he wanted a sandwich. That afternoon, I did another thing I had never done before. I called my old Friend, Chloe Hayes, who worked as an accountant downtown. We had lost touch after I quit my job, but I hoped she would still help me. Serena, Chloe said when she answered the phone. Long time. No talk.
How are you?
I'm fine, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Chloe, I need some advice on some financial documents. Could we meet for coffee?
Sure.
Is everything okay? You sound worried. I'll explain when I see you. We met at a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop across town, far from anywhere Elias might go. Chloe was the same as ever, with her curly red hair and kind smile. But when I showed her the photos on my phone, her expression turned serious. Serena, where did you get these documents? She asked, scrolling through the images. They're my husband's business papers. I found them in his office. Chloe was silent for a long time, studying each image carefully. Finally, she looked up at me, concerned in her eyes. Serena, some of these transactions look very suspicious. This shell company, the offshore accounts, the cash withdrawals. This looks like money laundering. Money laundering?
I
Repeated. What does that mean? It means taking money from illegal activities and making it look legal by running it through different accounts and companies. It's a very serious crime. My stomach dropped. Are you sure? I'm no criminal investigator, but I've seen enough financial fraud cases to recognize the patterns. Look at this, she said, pointing to one of the bank statements. Your husband is taking large cash deposits from companies that don't seem to exist. Then he's moving that money through several different accounts before it ends up in banks and tax havens. That's classic money laundering behavior. I felt the room spinning.
What
Should I do? You need to talk to someone who specializes in white-collar crime.
I
No, a detective who works these kinds of cases. His name is Detective Major, and he's very good at his job. Do you want me to give you his number? I nodded, unable to speak. Chloe scribbled the detective's information on a napkin and handed it to me. Serena, please be very careful, she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. If your husband is involved in money laundering, it could be dangerous. Don't let him know you figured anything out. I drove home in a daze, the detective's phone number burning a hole in my pocket. Elias was in his office when I got back, probably moving more illegal money while I made dinner. I cooked, I cleaned, and I acted normal. But inside, I was terrified. That night, as Elias slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to process what I had learned. My husband wasn't just cheating on me and planning to leave me with nothing. He was a criminal who had been using our marriage as a cover for illegal activities. But for the first time in months, I felt something other than fear and sadness. I felt rage. Elias had lied to me about everything. He had stolen from me, and he was planning to destroy my life. But now I had information that could destroy his. Tomorrow I would call Detective Major. Tomorrow I would start fighting back. The next morning, I waited for Elias to leave for work before dialing Detective Major's number. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to try 3 times before I got all the digits right. Detective Major, White Collar Crimes Unit. A deep voice answered. Hello, I said, my voice barely a whisper. My name is Serena Caldwell. Chloe Hayes gave me your number. I think my husband might be doing something illegal with money. There was a pause. Mrs. Caldwell, can you come down to the precinct this afternoon? I'd like to discuss this in person. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a small office at the police precinct across from a man in his 40s with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair. Detective Major had the photos from my phone spread out on his desk, studying them with a serious expression. Mrs. Caldwell, how long has your husband been involved in these financial activities? He asked. I don't know, I admitted.
I
Just found these papers yesterday. I had no idea any of this existed. Detective Major nodded. It's common in these cases. Spouses are often unaware of their partner's illegal activities. He pointed to one of the bank statements. These transactions show a clear pattern of money laundering. Your husband is receiving large amounts of cash from dubious sources and running it through multiple accounts to conceal its origin. What kind of dubious sources? I asked. Based on these amounts and patterns, likely drug trafficking money, illegal gambling, or other organized crime activities, your husband's real estate development business provides the perfect front to wash dirty money through the buying and selling of properties. How much time could he face in prison for this? I asked. Money laundering is a serious felony. Depending on the amounts involved, he could be looking at anywhere from 10 to 20 years in federal prison, plus massive fines and forfeit of all assets bought with illegal money. All assets, I repeated. Everything: the house, the cars, the bank accounts, the investments. If they were purchased with laundered funds, the state will seize them. My mind raced. If Elias went to jail and lost everything, what would happen to me? I would be left with nothing, just as he had planned. Except now it would be because he was a criminal, not because he had outsmarted me in divorce. Court. Detective Major, I said slowly. What if I helped you build a case against him? What if I could get more evidence? He leaned back in his chair, studying my face. Mrs. Caldwell, that would be very dangerous. If your husband suspected you were investigating him, he could turn violent. These kinds of people don't take kindly to betrayal. But I'm already in danger, aren't I? If he's involved with criminals, if he plans to divorce me and leave me penniless, I'm not safe anyway. Detective Major was silent for a long moment. What exactly are you proposing? I have access to his office, his computer, his files. I could copy more documents, record conversations, maybe even find out who he's working with. But I would need protection, and I would need assurances about what happens to me when all this is over. What kind of assurances? I want immunity from any charges related to his crimes. I want protection if he tries to hurt me. And I want to keep some of the assets that were purchased with legitimate money from his real estate business. Detective Major smiled for the first time since I arrived. Mrs. Caldwell, you're thinking like a prosecutor. Let me make some calls and see what we can arrange. 3 days later, I met with Detective Major and an assistant district attorney named Ada Solar. They had prepared an official cooperation agreement that gave me everything I had asked for in exchange for my help in building a case against Elias. Mrs. Caldwell, Ada Solar explained, you'll be working as a confidential informant. We will provide you with recording devices and train you on how to gather evidence safely, but you must understand the risks. If your husband finds out what you're doing, you could be in severe physical danger. I understand, I said, signing the papers with a steady hand. When do we start? For the next 2 months, I became a different person. By day, I played the role of the obedient wife, cooking, cleaning, and asking Elias about his day. But every moment he was out of the house, I was working. I installed tiny recording devices in his office and his car. I copied files from his computer onto thumb drives. I photographed every document I could find, building a complete picture of his illegal activities. The evidence was overwhelming. Elias was laundering money for a major drug trafficking organization led by a man named Brace. The bear rages. He would take cash payments of $50,000 to $100,000, then use his real estate company to buy properties with that money. Later, he would sell the properties and deposit the profits into legitimate bank accounts, making the drug money look clean. But Elias had gotten greedy. Instead of just taking his percentage for washing the money, he had been skimming extra cash for himself. He used this stolen money to fund his affair with Kendra, buying her expensive gifts and taking her on lavish trips. I recorded conversations where Elias boasted to his partner about how easy it was to fool the authorities. I photographed meetings where he took briefcases full of cash from dangerous-looking men. I documented every transaction, every lie, every crime. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. When Elias came home each night, he would kiss me and tell me about his day, making up stories about Legitimate business, while I knew he had spent the afternoon with drug lords and criminals. You seem different lately, he said one night over dinner. More confident. I like it. I've been reading more, I said, which was true.
I
Had been reading everything I could find on money laundering and financial crime, learning new things. That's wonderful. Honey, knowledge is power. If only he knew how much knowledge I had acquired and how I planned to use that power against him. At the end of the 2 months, Detective Major told me we had enough evidence to arrest Elias and seize all his assets. But I asked for 1 more week. I wanted to be in that divorce courtroom when Elias thought he had won everything. I wanted to see his face when he realized his perfect plan had been destroyed by the wife he thought was too stupid to fight back. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for Elias to walk into it. The divorce proceedings began on a cold Tuesday morning in November. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom wearing a simple black dress that made me look smaller and more helpless than I felt. Elias arrived with his team of expensive lawyers, all carrying thick briefcases and wearing confident smiles.
Good
Morning, Serena, Elias said, his voice dripping with fake concern. I hope we can get through this quickly and amicably. I nodded doxily, playing my part to perfection. I just want what's fair, Elias. He patted my shoulder like I was a child. Of course you do, honey. Don't worry. I'll make sure you're well taken care of. Kendra arrived a few minutes later, wearing a stunning blue suit that probably cost more than I used to make in a month. She sat in the gallery, behind Elias, her presence a clear message of who would be taking my place. Dorothea sat beside her, both of them, whispering and smiling like old friends planning a celebration. When we entered the courtroom, Elias's lead lawyer, Mr. Villalobos, now known as Mr. Rohr, immediately took control. He was a tall, gay-haired man with an expensive watch, the kind of attorney who charges $1,000 an hour and wins cases through intimidation. Your Honor, Mr. Rohr began. This is a simple case. My client, Mr. Elias Caldwell, is a successful businessman who has supported his wife for 8 years. Mrs. Caldwell has no work experience or education beyond high school and has made 0 financial contribution to the marriage. She is requesting an unreasonable settlement that would ruin my client's business and livelihood. Judge Wallace listened expressionlessly as Mr. Rohr laid out his case. They had charts showing Elias's income, diagrams demonstrating my lack of contribution, and testimony from witnesses who painted me as a gold digger who had trapped an innocent man. Dorothea took the witness stand first, wearing a navy suit and pearls that made her look the perfect society lady. She spoke in a clear, confident voice about how I had never fit into their family. Elias tried so hard to help Serena improve. Dorothea testified he paid for etiquette lessons, bought her suitable clothes, even hired tutors to help her learn about art and culture. But she showed no interest in bettering herself or supporting Elias's career. Every word was a lie, but Dorothea spoke them with such conviction that I almost believed them. Elias had never paid for lessons or tutors. The only thing he had paid for was my silence and my submission. Mrs. Caldwell has no understanding of the social obligations that come with being married to a man of Elias's position, Dorothea continued. She embarrassed him at business events and refused to participate in charity activities. Frankly, I'm surprised the marriage lasted as long as it did. Mr. Rohr nodded approvingly. Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell. No further questions. My lawyer, Mr. Rohr, now named Mr. Rohr, stood for cross-examination, but he looked nervous and unprepared. Mrs. Caldwell, isn't it true that your son controlled all the finances of the marriage? Elias handled the money because he's good with finances, Dorothea retorted smoothly. Serena showed no interest in learning about such things. And isn't it true that you encouraged your son's relationship with Miss Sterling? Dorothea's eyes flashed with anger. I have no idea what you were implying. Mr. Rohr quickly sat down, clearly outmatched. I wanted to scream at him to fight harder, but I reminded myself that this was all part of the plan. Next, Elias took the stand. He looked handsome and sincere in his dark suit, the picture of the successful businessman taken advantage of by his greedy wife. "Your Honor," Elias said, his voice full of sorrow. "I loved Serena deeply, but our marriage became impossible. She had no interest in building a life together or supporting my career. She spent money frivolously and refused to take responsibility for managing the home. I tried to help her, but she seemed content to live off my hard work, contributing nothing in return." Mr. Rohr guided Elias through a detailed account of our marriage that bore no resemblance to reality. In Elias's version, I was lazy, selfish, and financially irresponsible. He was the long-suffering husband who had tried everything to save our marriage. "I ask for a modest settlement that will allow Serena to start fresh," Elias concluded. "A small monthly allowance, and perhaps some job training to help her become self-sufficient. I bear her no ill will, but I cannot continue to support someone who refuses to support herself." The courtroom was silent when Elias finished. Even I had to admit he was convincing. If I didn't know the truth about his crimes and affairs, I might have believed him. Kendra never testified, but her presence in the room spoke volumes. She sat behind Elias like a queen, waiting to claim her throne, occasionally touching his shoulder or whispering encouragement in his ear. Doratha smiled at her with obvious approval. When it was my turn to testify, I played my part to perfection. I spoke softly about how I had tried to be a good wife, how I had managed our home, and supported Elias's career in ways that didn't show up on financial statements, but even to my own ears, it sounded weak and unconvincing. Mr. Rohr's cross-examination was brutal. He made me admit I had no income, no savings, and no job skills. He questioned every expense I had ever made, every decision I had ever taken, until I felt like a criminal on trial for the crime of being financially dependent. By the end of the day, it was clear Elias had won. His lawyers were smiling. Kendra was practically glowing, and Dorotha looked like she was already planning the wedding reception. But I wasn't worried. Tomorrow, Judge Wallace would read my letter, and everything would change. I was sitting in that cold wooden chair, watching Elias whisper his cruel words about never touching his money again. Kendra's sweet voice calling him babe sent a chill down my spine, but I kept my face expressionless. Doratha's declaration that I didn't deserve one dime should have hurt, but instead it filled me with satisfaction. They had no idea what was coming. Mr. Rose, with shaky hands, pulling out the white envelope that contained 2 months of careful planning. "Your Honor, I have one final piece of evidence to submit on behalf of my client. Mrs. Caldwell has prepared a letter for this court's consideration." Elias's confident smile faltered slightly. His lawyers looked confused, whispering to each other about evidence they hadn't been informed of. Kendra shifted in her seat, her perfect posture becoming less perfect. Dorothea's cold eyes narrowed as she watched the envelope reach Judge Wallace.
"Judge."
Wallace carefully opened the envelope and began to read. The courtroom was so silent, I could hear my own heart
"Beating."
I watched her face as her eyes moved across the pages, seeing the moment her expression shifted from mild interest to astonishment, and then something that looked like delight.
"She."
Read for what felt like an eternity. Elias stared at me, trying to guess what on earth I could have written that held significance. He still seemed confident, but worry was creeping into his dark eyes, the same eyes that had lied to me for years. When Judge Wallace finished reading, she looked up at Elias, then at Kendra, then at Dorotha, and then she burst out laughing. Not a polite laugh, but a deep, genuine laugh that echoed off the walls. She laughed so hard she had to remove her glasses and wipe her eyes. "Oh, this is good," she said quietly, her voice ringing out in the silent room. "This is very, very good." The confident smiles vanished from their faces, as if someone had flipped a switch. Elias's face turned pale. Kendra's mouth dropped open. Dorothea's icy composure cracked for the first time. In 8 years. Judge Wallace composed herself and looked directly at Elias. Mr. Caldwell, according to this letter, your wife has been cooperating with investigators from the FBI White-Collar Crimes Unit for the past 2 months. She has provided exhaustive evidence of your money-laundering operation, including recordings, photographs, and financial documents. Elias jumped to his feet. That's impossible. She doesn't know anything about my business. Sit down, Mr. Caldwell, Judge Wallace said sharply. According to Detective Major of the White-Collar Crimes Unit, you have been laundering money for a drug trafficking organization. You have been skimming funds from your criminal partners and using that money to finance an extramarital relationship.
Kendra
Gasped, bringing her hand to her throat. Elias, what is she talking about? The jewelry, the trips, the expensive dinners, the judge continued, reading from my letter. All paid for with stolen drug money. Ms. Sterling, perhaps you should contact an attorney. Accepting gifts purchased with the proceeds of criminal activity can make you an accessory to money laundering. Kendra's face went white. She looked at Elias in horror, realizing that everything he had given her was evidence of serious felonies. I didn't know, she whispered. I had no idea. Dorothea stood up, her voice trembling with rage. This is ridiculous. My son is a respected businessman. Mrs. Caldwell, the judge said, looking at Dorothea with distaste. Your son is facing charges for money laundering, tax evasion, and organized crime. The state is going to seize all assets purchased with illegal funds, which appears to include the family home, the vehicles, and the majority of his company shares. Elias's lawyer was whispering frantically in his ear, but Elias swatted him away. Serena, you have no idea what you've done. Those people don't forgive betrayal. You've put yourself in danger. I stood up slowly, feeling stronger than I had in years. I know exactly what I've done, Elias. I know you're a criminal who used our marriage as a cover for illegal activities. I know you plan to leave me with nothing while starting a new life, with stolen money. And I know you completely underestimated me. Judge Wallace smiled. Mrs. Caldwell, as a collaborating witness in an official investigation, you are entitled to protection and compensation. The District Attorney's Office has agreed to allow you to retain all assets that can be proven to have been purchased with legitimate income from Mr. Caldwell's real estate business. How much is that? Elias asked desperately. According to the financial analysis, approximately 40% of his assets came from legitimate business income. Mrs. Caldwell will receive those assets, plus a compensatory payment, plus a reward from the state for her cooperation in this investigation. Elias sank into his chair, the reality finally hitting him. He had lost everything: his business, his money, his freedom, and his future with Kendra. All because he had assumed his wife was too weak and too stupid to fight back. Kendra was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks as she realized her dreams of wealth and status were
crumbling.
Dorothy sat in stunned silence, watching her family's reputation being destroyed in a matter of minutes. Furthermore, Judge Wallace continued, officers from the NYPD Major Case Squad are waiting outside this courtroom to arrest Mr. Caldwell on charges of money laundering, criminal organization, and tax fraud. This divorce proceeding is hereby suspended, pending the outcome of the criminal charges. The courtroom doors opened and Detective Major entered with 2 other officers. Elias looked at me one last time, his face a mixture of rage and disbelief. You have no idea what you've done, Serena. I know exactly what I've done, I said calmly. I took back my life. As the officers handcuffed Elias and read him his rights, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even known I was carrying. For 8 years, I had been living a lie, married to a man who saw me as nothing more than a convenient cover for his
crimes.
Kendra bolted from the room, probably already calling lawyers to distance herself from Elias's criminal activities. Dorothea followed her. The Two women who had planned to celebrate my destruction were now facing their own ruin. I walked out of that courtroom, a free woman, financially secure, and emotionally liberated. Elias had taught me that knowledge is power, but he never imagined I would use that lesson against him. The weak, helpless wife he had created was gone forever. In her place was a woman who had learned how to fight back and had won. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.